This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Expert hosts like William Henry on secrets of the past, Jim Mars on politics and conspiracy, Marla Freese on psychic phenomena, Ann Strieber on matters of the spirit, and Whitley Strieber on aliens, UFOs, and who knows what else. And weekly science reporter, Emmy Award winner, Linda Howe. We say it like it is. We take you deeper, down where the real secrets lie. Dreamland, welcome to the edge of the world.
Today we have what I believe to be the most remarkable Dreamland ever recorded in my 10 years at this microphone. First, good news, Linda Howe is back with us. She will be reporting later in the show on a new flu virus that is appearing that is beyond H1N1. But first, we're going to be talking to a scientist who will remain anonymous about his own close encounter experiences. He's not the only person I know in his situation, but he is the only one who has been willing to talk to us publicly at all. His voice is being changed for this program. I'm going to call him Mike. He is a prominent scientist engaged in complex calculations. That is all I can say about him. However, I am aware of his actual career and work, and he is, I think it's safe to say, a scientist of great renown in his field. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thanks.
Well, good. Now, without getting too much into your work, because the culture of science has failed in a very important way. It has failed to address the reality of the close encounter experience. And therefore, people like you are in a position of having to remain hidden. And how do you feel about that?
Well, it doesn't feel comfortable that the scientific establishment today has gotten itself closed to healthy inquiry about phenomenon which we don't understand and which obviously many people have experienced. This topic of your program is usually viewed as fringe, and most scientists scoff at it when I think that is very closed-minded. I think as being a scientist, it's your obligation to try to uncover things which you don't understand and get to the bottom of them. And many scientists don't want to go there with this topic because they feel it could make them look embarrassing or it could affect their grant money or their status. And I sort of view it as somewhat analogous, although not anywhere near as extreme, but somewhat analogous to the situation in the Middle Ages with people like Giordano Bruno or Galileo, who, of course, everyone knows their story, about saying something which went against the Catholic Church. So the scientific community today is obviously not that tight, but nevertheless, there is definitely a frowning going on if someone talks about things which, quote unquote, don't fit the scientific method.
Right, but the scientific method, unfortunately, is a very limited thing. There are 6 axioms that are the basis of all science. Is that correct? 6 or 7?
Something like that. Yes, you basically, to be accurate about it, the modern fields of science, and I'll say hard science like physics and chemistry, astrophysics, other fields I could think of, but those are certainly the hard sciences, has as their founder mathematics.
Right.
Mathematics is behind all of these, and the way mathematics is set up using what we call the real number system has associated with these numbers a set of axioms that they have to satisfy. Everyone knows the law, the commutative law of multiplication, A times B equals B times A.
Right.
One for addition, and there's several other laws like this, which are very simple, like the unity law, A times 1 is equal to A, so that's the existence of a unity element. So there's only about, I can't remember the exact number, like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of these. That's it. That is it. Very finite number of simple laws like that. I just mentioned a couple. Distributive, associative, commutative, unity,
Right.
And identity element. I think that's it. And those are self-consistent entities in that if you do arithmetic in those laws, all the results stay within those laws, and everything is very self-consistent. And it's that system which all of physics is based on, all of chemistry is based on. So therefore, when you do scientific work and you're making up theories of how things might move or how things might work under various situations in physics, ultimately you're going to have to satisfy those axioms.
Right.
This is only a handful of them. It's an extremely restrictive setup. Now, fortunately, it works very, very well and has gained us a tremendous amount of understanding of our universe. But obviously, if you have a finite number of axioms, you can only hope to understand a finite number of things.
And things that fall that you can't understand in terms of those rules are dismissed generally. Let me ask
well, that's pretty much accurate. Yes, if something, it depends on how it's dismissed. Typically, the rule of thumb that science follows is if you don't satisfy rules like that, the next thing they look for is can you reproduce something at will, and then if you can reproduce it and measure it, then that gives a sense of satisfying the scientific method. But however, not everything is reproducible. One field which is reproducible but doesn't necessarily satisfy those axioms is quantum mechanics. And the reason quantum mechanics is a valid field is because it is reproducible, and you have to use other axioms to describe it. But for the most part, most other things do satisfy a finite set of axioms.
So this is where we are. Now let me ask you this. We are about to discuss some truly extraordinary experiences that you've had. What would happen to your career, which is a legendary career, actually, folks, to be honest, if this information became publicly known?
Probably, it depends, it depends how this kind of thing is described. If it's described in a way which is done in an analytic fashion without flourishes and just based on pure 100% observation, it would probably be accepted by a certain percentage, and the other percentage would think that I made it up or had some kind of mental disorder of some type. If it was not described with some in a very analytic way and sort of described in a little more detail about some implications of it, I think most people would say, well, you have no leg to stand on to talk that way, and think that it was probably just not true. And it would have the effect of damaging my career in terms of my credibility.
Yeah, but your career is such a big career that it would survive as a career, and that's not true of many scientists. Scientists without such a large career might be utterly destroyed.
Well, that's true. I mean, for example, when Carl Sagan was alive, with his career, if he had, I don't even know if he had experiences with these things. I have no idea, actually, and that's honest. But if he did, and he did talk about them, I think with his career, it would have been dismissed that, that's just Carl, and he just had that to say, and it would be rapidly dismissed, and it wouldn't affect his career at all. But if you're a starting scientist or someone who's trying to build a career, and you haven't really done anything of particular note to your colleagues, and you came out with something like this, it would absolutely destroy your career, yes.
Right, absolutely. In fact, the only scientists I've ever been able to talk to openly about this have been people way, way up at the top of the scientific food chain who will discuss it more or less openly and give their opinions in a straightforward manner. However, the farther down you go, the more circumspect people become. In the latest issue of the New Scientist, and folks, this is the week of, it's October the 12th, 2009, who, for those of you who may be listening to this years from now, in the latest issue of the New Scientist, there is a long article about consciousness, where it quite casually assumes that things like alien abduction phenomena are merely side effects of sleep states. And of course, in my particular case, I was physically injured. And the scientific community seems to have accepted that as kind of the norm. In other words, when people report a close encounter of the third kind or an alien abduction, it is dismissed as something that happened as a result of a hypnagogic or hypnopompic trance or perhaps temporal lobe epilepsy. How do you respond to that? What does that bring up in your own mind, given the experiences we're going to talk about shortly?
Well, to be completely honest, in my case, initially, before I had one particular experience I'll describe, I'm sure you'll ask me about that, I did have experiences which were highly unusual, and I felt that they could have been post-sleep issues. I didn't know whether to believe it or not. However, soon thereafter, when I had another experience with a person who was with me as a bona fide witness, and I was awake driving a car, it was obviously not post-sleep anything. It really happened, and there's someone there who witnessed the same exact thing I did. I would say that statement is not true in my case. In my case, I don't do drugs. I don't drink. At the time, I wasn't doing any of those things. The person I was with, the same story, and there it was, this incredible thing I'll describe probably. Okay, well, let's take a little break right now, and then when we come back, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. One of the world's great scientists is going to describe something rather remarkable. We'll be right back. Subscribers, there's only one place in the world where you can get programming like this. You will never hear this man on another radio program or TV show. So do tell your friends about unknowncountry.com and urge them to subscribe to our website. Let's keep this kind of information flowing. We need it. The world needs it. And don't miss this week's subscriber interview with Jaime Maussan on that creature found near Metepec in 2007. This is the very latest information since he was on coast. It's brand new stuff, so don't miss it.
You're listening to Dreamland. Serious wonder spoken here.
This is Whitley Strieber. We're back. We're talking to Mike, a renowned scientist. His voice has been altered for this program. He does not sound much at all like this in real life. It's kind of strange to be talking to him since I've spent many an hour sitting across a dinner table from him, and yet I know I'm talking to the same guy despite the voice. In any case, he has had some really remarkable experiences. And Mike, why don't we just go right into it now and go ahead and tell us what first happened?
This is before my Wyoming situation?
Yeah, we'll talk about the Wyoming situation in a minute. This is the initial things that began to happen. Okay.
I guess one of them, the very first thing happened when I was, there's several things that I could bring up. One was an experience that I had when I was in my apartment, living in a different part of the United States where I'm living right now.
Right, yeah.
Where in about the time span of around 1990, where I would wake up and open my eyes in my bedroom, and I was wide awake. I remember it like I was there right now, and yet when I opened up my eyes, the room was not there in a traditional sense. The room was there, but it had a blue color to it, and it did look strange. And then I noticed that there was like someone took a pair of scissors and cut out a scene in front of my face, which was not the room anymore. It was a scene looking like I was looking into a window of another place, and it showed a vast vista of mountains, and it was as if someone had a pair of cameras, and they were zooming you in to take a panoramic view as you were flying over this. And it was as real as me walking down the street, and it would last maybe 5 minutes, then it would stop, and I'd get really upset saying, what a bummer, this had to stop. And then the next night it would happen again with a similar scene, and this would repeat several times. Those scenes, I didn't know what to make of them. I said, well, maybe this is some kind of strange sleep situation.
Hypnopopic trance,
yes.
Post-sleep trance, yes.
And then what ended up happening was, this was the summer of 1990. Then what would happen after that is I'd wake up, and then I didn't see that anymore, but I would just casually look off into my living room where there was a light on, and I had a very big apartment, and there's these huge ceilings and stuff, so the room was lit up and looked kind of large. And I'd look in there, and I would see, to my surprise, two entities, beings, walking in my living room, which were sort of translucent in appearance, short. You could almost see through them, but not quite. And it's like they were just tippy-toeing in the room like two explorers discovering a new place. And one of them looked towards me and didn't even seem to acknowledge me. I'm sitting in my bed saying to myself, my God, what is this? And they looked right at me and looked through me, almost like I wasn't there, and went about their business, and they didn't come anywhere near me. They stayed in the living room, and I basically got tired of looking at them. I went to bed and went back to sleep, and the next morning I woke up and they were gone. Next night that would happen. So for a few nights in a row that happened, and I just got so used to them being there that I just basically just blew it off and went back to sleep.
So can you describe them, exactly what they looked like?
They were very thin, very, very thin. They were translucent in appearance, so like jelly, like when you see a jellyfish under the water, it's got that level of translucence. So it's well defined, but at the same time you could see through it slightly. And they had so their heads were sort of large, not obscenely large, but sort of large, and they had ears. I can't remember the ears offhand, to be honest. I thought the ears were sort of small. They were definitely small ears, and their arms were very thin, and their legs were thin, and they were probably like and they had large eyes. The eyes weren't abnormally, they were definitely larger than human eyes. They were definitely larger, but they were not dark colored at all. The whole thing was this jellyfish kind of appearance. And they were probably around, I'd say around 4 feet high.
And so there you were, and this kept happening, and you finally blew it off as a probable dream state of some sort.
And that's what I said. I even talked to one of my friends, and I said, dude, I had the strangest dreams the past few nights, and hope I'm not losing it, you know.
Yeah, I remember feeling the same way. Well, at this point, Mike, then something must have changed because you didn't continue to blow it off.
Yes. What ended up happening was towards the end of this particular summer, which was, I think, 1991, way back, I decided to leave the area I was living in at the time and drive halfway across the country to a Midwestern state. And the Midwestern state would be up north central U.S. I don't want to give exact...
No, you don't need to.
And I had to drive halfway across the country to get there. And I had with me a girlfriend at the time. And her profession was a massage therapist. She was very healthy and didn't do any kind of substances of any type. And I just wanted to leave where I was and go to this particular part of the country for various reasons. And I had a vehicle that I owned at the time, and we went in it, packed whatever belongings I needed to pack to do this trip, and we took off. And when we got roughly 2 or 3 days into the trip, we were in the state of Wyoming. And it was approximately 8 o'clock at night when we reached the town of Casper, Wyoming. And I wanted to go to a rest stop and eat something. And it was like about 8 o'clock, and my friend wanted to get out of there relatively quick, and I said I wanted to rest a little bit, which I did. And she wanted to go, I wanted to go due north past Casper, Wyoming, up to the Interstate Freeway 90, I believe, which cuts across the country. because I knew that up there at that part of the state, there'd probably be lots of hotels, and I figured we'd get there like at about, 10 o'clock at night, and that'd be kind of fine to get a good night's rest. At this point, we had been driving for a few days, and, I just wanted to not be worrying about driving in the middle of nowhere. She, on the other hand, had this very intense idea that we were not going to drive up there. She wanted to go to a location where this place where there were hot springs up near Yellowstone Park.
Right.
And I said, we're not going there. I said just to go there would take probably 5 hours, and it would be 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm not driving there. And I said, there's no guarantee of gas stations or anything. And she was upset by that, and I said, look, I'm just not doing it. And then she was upset. She was upset because she did not want to go to the general place where they're going to be hotels and make the trip more straightforward. She wanted to meander a bit. So then she said, well, let's go to take this road here. She points to a road that maybe a few miles north of Casper you take a right onto, and it's a small road that is one lane in each direction, and on the map it's barely noticeable, and it goes for at least 50, 60 miles through Thunder Basin National Grasslands, and then you go due north at a town called Wright, Wyoming, to another town called Gillette, where there would be hotels. So I did not want to do that route. I said that route goes about 50, 60s, whatever it was, 60, 70 miles through nothing. There's probably no towns. Thunder Basin National Grassland is precisely that. It's just a grassland. And I said, I just don't want to be driving through that. Why should we do that? That's going to take us twice the time to get to a hotel. We're probably not going to get to one till now. Doing that probably till 11 o'clock instead of 10. And so she got very, very, very upset, and something that simple ended up being in a pretty, a yelling argument. And to stop the argument, I said, what the heck, I'll do it. Just to stop the argument. So we get in my car, we go to this little road about 20 minutes later, and take a right and start going down it. And I remember that particular night was very strange. It was in the end of September, as I recall, although I can refine that date a little bit. And it was a very balmy night for that time of year. It almost felt like it was like a tiny bit of fog, balmy, and almost like something you'd see in a science fiction story. It's just very unusual. And there were animals all over the road. So when I was driving, I had to go very slow to dodge whatever they were. You could just see their eyes, So it was a little bit creepy. And we drove for quite a while, and not a single car passed us in either direction as we drove east. We were driving a good solid, it was now about 10 o'clock. We were probably doing about maybe 35 miles an hour. We had gone, or 30 miles an hour. We had gone about 60 miles. It was about 10 o'clock, and we had not a single car passed us, which made me very suspicious. This is a little bit unusual. And the gas gauge was going down a little bit, but I was getting concerned about this. There were no gas stations. And we had entered Thunder Basin National Grasslands. I saw a sign that said this, and I said, it's even worse. There's going to be nothing there. And then I noticed that I saw a sign that said Wright, Wyoming, 14 miles. And the sigh of relief came over me that there was going to be a place to go to. Now, Wright is basically a truck stop, but nevertheless, I felt it was relief. So at this point, the road went down into a valley in Thunder Basin National Grasslands, and it goes down into a valley. So I'm driving. I'm fully awake. I'm not the slightest bit tired, really. And it was a moonless night, although it was a clear night. It was a moonless night. And so we're going down into this valley. Maybe the incline was maybe 20%, so it was a fairly steep incline. And it was a big valley, so you could look in front of you and see miles off into the distance and down a little bit low. And I noticed there was a red light down there, and it was a very bright red light, and but it was way off in the distance. And I said to my friend, "Oh, there's a really bright light." I said, "It's probably a construction site or something," because when you're in a situation like that, your mind wants to make things up to make you feel better.
Yeah.
So I said, "That's what that has to be." it's a construction site, and it didn't occur to me till many months later that why would there be a construction site with a bright ruby red light at between about 10:30 at night, 11 o'clock at night at Thunder Basin National Grassland. But nevertheless, it made me feel good. So we drove, and as we drove further, I noticed that the road started to slope down towards the bottom of this little valley, and I kept looking at this light. I sort of blew it off at first, and then my friend said, "Oh, there's the light again." And I said, "I know, I see it." And at this point, the road had leveled off, and it was a single little road. And this was like something out of a movie. It was like, here's a single road, and as flat as you can be, the sagebrush blowing around. You know, it's not blowing around, but the sagebrush lying around with little animals, and it's very muggy and a little tiny bit of fog, not too much. And there is, at the end of the road, now straight ahead, a very, very bright red light, maybe at this point a mile ahead of us. And I noticed, to my surprise, that the red light was not on the side of the road, but it was exactly in the center of the road. And it was a lot brighter than what it was when we saw it off in the distance. So at this point, some red flags came up with me, and I said to myself, this
Mike,
is not good.
We are going to go back to those red flags in just a moment. We'll be right back, folks. I hope you are still strapped into your seats. My seatbelt is mighty tight. We'll be right back.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. We go deeper.
We're back talking to Mike, a renowned scientist. We are out with him on a lonely road in Wyoming, and he is confronting a very strange phenomenon in regard to a red light. Mike, go right ahead.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I noticed that this light was now on the center of the road as opposed to off the side of it. So a red flag went off with me. If you could go back to the old science fiction show, I forget which it was, where someone was yelling, "Danger, danger!" Every fiber of my mind was saying, "Danger! This is not a good thing." And my friend was not saying a word. She was sort of transfixed on his light at this point. And being in the center of the road, I realized that I could not go around it, that I had to go up to it. So whatever this was, it was definitely, I had the distinct feeling, in fact it was pretty clear, that this was waiting for us, that this was not a random event. This was definitely there by design. And the fact that no car passed us in either direction was sort of backed that up. So I'm saying to myself, what is this? So what I did to rationalize it at that moment is I said, oh, I know what this is, to my friend. I said, it's got to be the side of a tractor-trailer truck which jackknifed over the road, and what we're looking at is a neon sign on the side of it. That made me feel a lot better because I figured, now here's a good explanation of what this is. And although my mind on the surface was happy, the one deep down was saying, that's not what this is at all. So I had no clue what this was, so I kept driving forward, and then it got to be maybe about a quarter of a mile away, and I saw that the light was gigantic. It was not a little light at all. It was actually many feet high, and part of me said this must be an awfully large truck that jackknifed, but then I noticed that as I got maybe 500 feet away, maybe then about 300 feet away, about the distance of a football field, you could see that it was approximately 40 to 50 feet high. It was a square of light. It was actually the boundary of a square, and it was red, very bright red light at the boundary of a square, and the square was wide enough so that it went well off the sides of the road, which maybe made it probably approximately 50 feet wide, and it went up about 50 feet high, and it was just a boundary of it was like a neon sign in red, but it was much brighter than neon light, much brighter, and the square was perfectly square, and so naturally I put my brakes on when I got maybe 100 feet away from it, because I've never in my life, even on looking at science fiction movies or reading books, saw anything remotely like this, or heard about anything remotely like this, a giant square sitting on the road in front of me. And then I noticed to my horror, I guess at the time, that it was actually not on the road. It was sitting off the road by about 20, 30 feet.
Above the road, you mean?
Above the road, yes. It was sitting above the road. And then I noticed that, which made it even more frightening, was that it was actually embedded on the back of an object much bigger. So the object that was much bigger was not 40 or 50 feet wide. It was more like probably 60 or 70 feet wide, and it went up about 60 or 70 feet. And this was smack in the middle of it, bounced off the side, sitting on the middle of the road. And therefore, because of the size of it, I could not go around it. It was impossible to go around this thing.
Word.
Completely blocked the road. And when I saw that, I said to myself, this has intended to stop me. My friend was not that scared because it wasn't making any threatening moves. It just blocked the road. Now, it's one thing to see this in a movie. It's another thing to be in this situation in the middle of nowhere. It is quite frightening. So I put the brakes on, and my friend told me to walk up to it, and I said to her, are you out of your mind? You should walk up to it. I'm not going to do that. There it was. I put my engine off, turned my lights off, and there's my car facing this thing, probably maybe 100 feet away, and this was something which was very strange, you can imagine. I sat there for probably 10, 15 minutes staring at it with her, and suddenly it floated off to the ground. It lifted up. The entire black object with the red square in the middle lifted up, and it hovered over the road, maybe about 100 feet in the air, not even that high, maybe about, I don't know, I can't get the exact, maybe 60, 70, 80 feet in the air, and just hovered there. And it didn't make a sound. Myself, knowing quite a bit about technology, I knew that this was nothing that I'd ever heard of before. Otherwise,
you would be in a position to know for certain. Actually,
yes, for certain. And I've been exposed to many. I've been exposed to some of the best technology the United States has, and there's certainly nothing remotely like this. And so it sat there, and because it didn't make a noise. And because we were there for a good 20 minutes looking at this thing, the fear level went down. And as it floated over the road, it then did something which was truly spectacular. The part that we were looking at, which was this 70 by 70 black object with this red square in the middle that was about 40 by 40, is suddenly that was the back of it, as it turns out. So the thing starts to turn around, and that part turns out of view away from us. And then suddenly over the road is an object about 200 feet long, which is jet black with a slight blue glow in the middle. And it just stood there, it just hovered there over the road about 200 feet long and stood there. And it was beautiful, actually. That was quite beautiful to see this. It was truly a wonderful thing to behold, to see an object like that. And I knew at this point this was not from this world. We have nothing like this in our world. I've seen nothing like this. And it did a little maneuver, went up and down a little bit. It took its front and went up and then down, just to almost do a little dance, like it was almost like it was performing, which I thought was very, very interesting. My friend said to me, why don't you get out and walk under it? And I said to her, are you out of your blanking mind?
Yeah.
Why don't you walk under it? I said, we don't know what this is. It could be dangerous. I said, I'm not walking under that. So after it was hovered over the road for about 5 minutes only, it then started to move away from the road laterally, due north, because this road was going east-west, west-east. It went due north. And at this part of Wyoming, by the way, just due to coincidence, this is just the way it is. When it went due north, if you went north probably 60 miles, you'd be in the vicinity of where that Devil's Tower is located. This is not meant to be joked about. That's really where this was.
Right, I understand.
So that's where this thing was headed. Anyway, I waited until it was far off in the distance. I could see it up in the sky until I saw this long, it's a long rectangle, and the back of it had that little red square. I could see it off in the distance, and now it was probably 5-6 miles away. At that point, I got out, and here I am standing in the road. My girlfriend's in the car. This thing is going due north, and I felt like this could come right out of a novel. This is so cool. But I didn't have any fear. I was absolutely stunned, as you can imagine. Myself, being a scientist, my mind is racing, trying to think of what this could be. I get back in my car, and at this point, I was really in a state of shock because I don't really remember too much what I was doing. I just remember I grabbed the steering wheel. My friend was very quiet. She wasn't saying much of it. She was saying nothing, as a matter of fact. If she was, I wouldn't have heard it. And I grabbed the steering wheel tight, and I said to her, let's get out of here. So I hit the accelerator, but didn't go that fast. And in fact, I don't even remember how fast I was going. And I'm sort of lost in my thoughts with all of this. And until I feel her shaking me, and she's absolutely hysterical, and she's shaking me, and she's saying they're waiting for us up there. And I came out of my trance I was in, and I said, "Who is waiting for us? What are you talking about?" And then I look off to the left side of the road, and I see this blinding white pulsating light that's off to the left side of the road, maybe about a mile ahead. And it was pulsating almost like a strobe light. And every time it pulsated, the trees would all silhouette in front of it. And when the pulse went off, it was jet black, and it was going very fast. And it was going so fast, it was frightening. That definitely frightened me a lot. And my girlfriend was screaming at the top of her lungs. She was saying things like, "They're going to kill us, they're evil, we have to get out of here." So because I didn't get out and walk onto the other thing, I felt I wanted to be macho. So I said to her, "Well, I'm going to pull over and see what's there." And she starts screaming again. And she said, "If you pull over, I am going to run out this door and start running. I'm going to open the door as the car is moving and start running." So I imagine.
So she's gone from being eager for you to get up under the thing to wanting to get the dickens out of there.
No, as a matter of fact, I have never heard a woman scream that loud in my life, ever.
It's very interesting to see the way her reactions are changing as she begins to realize just how unusual this actually is.
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I met her, she was one of these, she's a massage therapist person, and she's very much into angels and the New Age way of thinking, and you would think that this would be sort of like, well, this is cool, it's something we never, but no, that was not the reaction. But this was frightening. When those lights were pulsating, it was definitely, unlike the rectangle over the road, this was a different thing. So I looked over to the side, and I saw the ground itself was pulsating with this light. And every time, and I did slow down to about 5 miles an hour, not to a complete stop, but came close. And I noticed that every time the light went on, there were all a bunch of beings standing around. There must have been, 10, 12, 15 of these things. And they were maybe 50 feet away. I wasn't close enough due to the light to really see details, but they were short and they looked black and very thin. And my mind was saying, "Get out of there fast."
Mike, at this point, we have to take a little break. We will be right back, folks.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Expert hosts, unique information.
This is Whitley Strieber. We're talking to a scientist, Mike, who is in the process of telling us about one of the most extraordinary close encounter experiences that ever happened. Mike, when we left the air, he was telling us about literally seeing these extraordinary beings and their enormous ship on the roadside somewhere very deep in the night, very far off in the wilds of Wyoming. You continue the story, Mike?
Yeah, so when I saw these beings on the side of the road, while the lights were pulsating white, with blinding light, my girlfriend, as I mentioned, was screaming that they're going to kill us, and she just was going to run for it. And I have to admit, maybe it was a screaming to facilitate it, but I was absolutely frightened. I figured, this is not funny. These things, whatever they are at this time, unlike the rectangle, these are very frightening things, and I just want to get out of here. So, but part of me did want to stop and walk over and say hello, but I felt that part of me said, "Don't do that." So I accelerated the car a bit and left, and she calmed down. And then I noticed up in the sky, maybe 20 feet over my car, was a ball of light that was following my car up to right, which is like 5 miles ahead, and then I went due north to Gillette, and it stayed with us for a while, then it went away. And as I looked back in my mirror at where we just were, I saw lots of activity at that site where the lights were, like things were landing and taking off. It seemed like there was an awful lot going on there. I was not about to go back and check it out, so I ended up going to Gillette. Now, this was at about 11 o'clock, as I last recalled. So we ended up, as we went north to Gillette, I was absolutely just blown away by this, as you can imagine, and so was my friend. And Gillette was only maybe, probably 40 miles away, but it was a 2-lane road at which you can go 60 miles an hour at least. So it would have taken 30 minutes to get there max. And I remember arriving in Gillette with her, And I just kept saying, like in a robotic fashion, over and over, "It's so late. We're never going to get a hotel this time of night. It's 2 or 3 in the morning. We're just not going to get a hotel here." And we finally did at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I sketched everything up very carefully, on my notepad, which I still have. And it didn't occur to me till months later that I saw the original thing, the rectangle. That was at about 11 at night, and it should not have taken us 3 hours to drive to Gillette. It should have taken like 20 minutes. So there's that classic missing time that people see. This experience following the entities in my apartment a few weeks before I took this trip, together with the cutouts, it all started to fit together. That they were visiting me at that time, I believe, whatever they were, and this thing stopped on the road was sort of a way to introduce themselves to me. However, after I got to the Midwest and I settled into an apartment where I was writing an article about my scientific work a few months later, and I made an observation that I was doing an experiment that was very important for my career. It was a key thing in my career. It was actually an important experiment in a scientific community, and this particular experiment happened at a certain time of the year, at a certain time of the day. And I wrote down in this research report I was writing for an article for a major journal that at this particular time this experiment concluded. And I was being asked to write this report by a very famous scientist because it was a fairly substantial discovery. And suddenly I was jolted out of my awareness when I was writing this, because I wrote down the time. I said the time was this date at this time of night, and then I said, wait a minute, where have I? And then that's when I said this experiment concluded at that time, which made it a successful experiment. It was something unbelievable. This experiment was so successful that it could have even happened. And then I said, wait a minute, that was exactly the same time that I saw these things in Wyoming. So this experiment I'm not going into in this interview actually started a few months before I saw those things in my apartment, and I got the solution to start this experiment in its process, sort of in a very mysterious way. I never felt that I made the discovery myself per se, that it was more or less handed to me by some insight that I didn't imagine I could have had, and the fact that this experiment concluded far from Wyoming, at exactly the same moment that I saw these things in Wyoming, to me was a very strong verification that whatever these things were, they played a role in furnishing me the solution I needed for this particular experiment, which has had a big impact in the science scene. So in my case, I feel that whatever these things are, whatever I witnessed that night, that has had a definite interaction with me and in a very real way, with a witness that was there, and it had played a big role also with the scientific discovery.
And these calculations, this scientific discovery, was terribly important.
It was terribly important for my career,
but also for the effects it had. Without going into any detail about the area it was in, since I know what the discovery was, folks, I can tell you that it affected the world profoundly.
Yeah, there's a particular field of science and technology that this affected, and it has made a big impact worldwide in this field, not just for the field itself, but for our awareness to how to do certain kinds of, let's say, transportation.
Right. Yeah. And leave it at that. Well, what a remarkable story we have been told today I think it's rather tragic that this is not something that you could bring forward into the scientific community, and that it could maybe conceivably lead to more interactions like this and the more useful knowledge coming the way of humanity from this bizarre source. What do you think they are, Mike? Do you think we're dealing with time travelers or creatures from another world, or exactly what?
I don't know what they are. First of all, I have to tell the audience out there that from my experience, I'm a very, very sane person, and I I have I'm just very well established in what I do, so I'm not a fringe case at all. Actually, I'm
not at all.
Part of the establishment, unfortunately, but it's hard to say what these things are. They certainly exist. There's no doubt about that. I definitely saw them with my friend. She was there. She chooses not to remember it too clearly as time goes on, as people do in shock experiences. But
yes,
it definitely happened. It definitely had a coincidence with the major scientific work. So I say to myself, what are they? Well, my inclination is they may not be. One is tempted to say they're space travelers, but I would tend to doubt that. My gut feeling is that they might be some kind of life form that exists in alternate dimensions from ours, and they may actually be time travelers as well, which they could be from the future or from the past. And their role, I believe, is to affect our civilization by making contact with various people who are in various situations to do things that can work for the betterment of our society and world as a whole to move it forward. They do work in very discreet ways, and I would be fascinated to know how many people who are in strong positions in our world have stories like this. I'm sure you're never going to hear them, but I think their role is to help the world and to make it move in a better way. This discovery, I could, of course, go on and on about what it is, and it certainly has a strong bearing on a lot of different things. But the discovery itself has a strong sign. If you could put a sign on it, the sign would be, this discovery is meant to open our awareness as a new way to do things. And,
yes.
And I think that these entities, that's their job, is to sort of help us along to do new things in key ways to sort of move our society forward. And where they come from is probably, it could be another dimension. It could be from the future or the past. They could very well be time travelers. There's no reason to believe from the laws of physics you can't do time travel. There's been research papers written, and in fact, it is consistent with Einstein's theory of relativity that time travel can in fact happen, although it's very difficult to do with our technology today, but it's not inconceivable in the future this could happen. But there's so much about the universe we don't know. There are 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone. There's trillions of galaxies. We think that you can't go to stars now. Our closest star is Alpha Centauri, and it takes 100,000 years to get there if you want to go there in the space shuttle. So therefore, people say, well, travel between the stars is clearly impossible, but it may be that some discovery will make it very easy to do. If that's the case, then there'd be all kinds of entities traveling all over the place that we have no idea about. I think it's difficult to speculate what these things are. They're clearly much more advanced than we are. They can clearly influence us in ways like this I described in this interview, which we have no understanding about. To what it seems like magic, it seems very unusual, weird, and that's because we're just not used to it. But it's obviously, they obviously represent something which I hope is here to do good for this planet.
Well, thank you very much for giving us what I think is probably the most extraordinary interview in the history of Dreamland. That was really something. And Mike, best wishes to you in your future career. Do you ever expect to see them again, do you think?
I don't know. I think this is one of those cause and effect things that you can't really answer. I'd be fine if I did, but these are basically, from what I've observed, these would be independent entities with their own destiny and futures, which they do when they want to do it.
Right.
So if they decide to get in contact with me again, they certainly know how to do it, and so it's really up to them. And I don't know what their agenda is.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for being with us, and all best wishes in your future for your future career.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
Well, this is a day we've all been waiting for a long time. Linda Moulton Howe has returned with her marvelous science reports for Dreamland, and she will be with us as often as possible. It depends on you, subscribers. Keep subscribing to UnknownCountry.com. Let's keep this wonderful thing going. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today, she has a special report for us on H1N1 and a new threat, H3N2. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. It is really great to be back on Dreamland. I am sorry to be reporting that the most recent information coming in October 8th's New England Journal of Medicine featured two recent studies about the intensity of the new 2009 H1N1 flu virus, both in the United States and the Southern Hemispheres, Australia and New Zealand. Perhaps the most surprising news in the research by the American Centers for Disease Control is that this past spring, 7% of Americans sick enough to be hospitalized with the H1N1 flu did die. That 7% is a higher mortality rate than ordinary seasonal flu. And how many Americans ended up in intensive care with the new H1N1 virus? 25%. This first study of the early months in the now pandemic H1N1 provoked Dr. William Schaffner, a Vanderbilt University flu expert, to warn, quote, contrary to the perception among many people that this influenza, the novel H1N1, is mild, these data vividly demonstrate that this influenza can make you very, very ill, close quote. The second study in the New England Journal of Medicine about the impact of the new H1N1 virus in Australia and New Zealand showed there was a 1,500% increase in demand there for intensive care units. Since October is only the beginning of the flu season now in the United States, will these disturbing statistics persist through the next 5 months into February 2010, when seasonal flu usually declines? One sobering fact, the novel H1N1 virus that first erupted in Mexico last February continued to spread throughout the world without tapering off and was declared an official pandemic by the World Health Organization. Recent newspaper headlines in New Mexico underscore who is most vulnerable to this new virus: infants, pregnant women, and school-age and college students. In September, a New Mexico young, healthy, pregnant woman died from this flu. On October 2nd, the Albuquerque Journal headlined, quote, 5-year-old and infant die of swine flu. Neither child had chronic medical conditions, close quote. The next day, a Chaves County healthy 17-year-old teenager died of the H1N1 flu. By October 8th, the newspaper's front page said, quote, swine flu concerns fill clinics in New Mexico, close quote. One virus expert at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, also warns of another viral shoe about to drop, and that is the emergence of a more virulent strain of H3N2 in the southern hemisphere that is now making its way to the northern hemisphere. Its most vulnerable targets are people over 50, the opposite of H1N1. Paul Gleason, MD, is professor of molecular virology and microbiology, pediatrics, and epidemiologist in the Influenza Research Center at Baylor. Recently, I talked with him about the second threat of H3N2 coming while H1N1 cases are doubling now each week, why the novel H1N1 virus is hitting the young and pregnant population so hard, and yet this time older people seem to have some immunity. Dr. Gleason begins with the link between the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that killed 100 million people and this new H1N1 virus.
The 1918 pandemic virus was an H1N1 virus. but the hemagglutinin of the current H1N1 is much different than the 1918 H1N1.
This would explain why WHO and CDC and all of you in the medical community around the world have been especially nervous about this particular recombination that has H1N1 in it, because the last major pandemic was H1N1, the 1918 Spanish flu.
Yes, that's true, but that virus in humans has mutated a lot since 1918, and it appears that older people may have had experience with a virus similar to this in their youth, and so they retain that protection against infection with this virus. CDC has demonstrated this by testing sera taken from patients of different ages, and they find that essentially the older you are, the more likely you are to have pre-existing antibodies, and at the same time they've found that those people with pre-existing antibodies will get a boost with seasonal vaccine. In other words, seasonal vaccine will stimulate antibodies against this new pandemic virus in older people. And the younger you are, the less likely you are to have those pre-existing antibodies. And people born in the 80s, 90s, or the 2000s are not likely to have any pre-existing antibodies and are therefore very susceptible to this new virus. And since influenza viruses spread mainly among school children and college students, those are the people who are exposed first, and that's where we're seeing the serious morbidity now.
Could you explain if this is a novel virus that has North American swine, has avian, and has human in the genetic mix of the virus? How could anyone from any time period have antibodies to something that is this strange?
Well, all influenza A viruses start originally from birds. So all A viruses are originally avian viruses, but then they occasionally infect mammals of different species, and eventually a virus emerges that will spread readily in humans. Now, the pig is generally considered the mixing vessel because pigs have receptors for both avian viruses and human viruses. And influenza viruses have a segmented genome. That is, their genetic material is divided into 8 different segments. And it's very easy then for these viruses to reassort. And they can sort into all combinations, and some of the gene segments may come from pigs, some from birds, and some from human. And that's what's happened in this virus. But right now, let me say, it is a human virus because it is spreading very readily in human populations, so we'd have to call it a human virus. And this winter, we might see seasonal flu, particularly H3N2, produce an outbreak this winter. And we're concerned about that because they detected a new variant in the southern hemisphere this summer, and that might get up here this winter at the usual time for seasonal flu, which would be peaking in the middle of February. And H3N2 has been the major cause of mortality since it appeared in 1968. And it's produced epidemics essentially every other year since it occurred in 1968.
So the possibility is that we might have even a bigger spike in mortality in the H3N2 because of a new variant in its genome sequencing that has first surfaced in the southern hemisphere and could be up here this winter.
Yeah, that's possible because, as we've said, the older population, which usually make up the majority of persons in the excess mortality, seem to be protected against the H1N1, but for some reason or other, they have not acquired protection against the H3N2 variants that have appeared since 1968. So most of the mortality, and this is largely in elderly people, that's occurred since 1968 has occurred in years when we have had H3N2 epidemics. So I think there's a good possibility that we'll have an H3N2 outbreak in midwinter of 2010. The H3N2 is a threat to the elderly population.
Do I understand that one of the ironies is that you and other virologists are actually worried more about H3N2's impact this year than maybe H1N1?
The impact is very different depending on the age. And I think this H1N1 is going to have a very heavy impact on school-age children and college students. And there'll be some tragic deaths occurring in very young, healthy people. The H3N2 is a threat to the elderly. And that's why it's important for everybody to take the seasonal vaccine now as quickly as they can get it, so that they'll be prepared for this winter.
Could you please give your medical perspective on the current normal flu vaccine that would impact H3N2 and the new vaccine which is just starting to be distributed?
The new vaccine is treated as a strain change by the FDA. In other words, they've examined the virus, and they've looked at its growth characteristics, and they've looked at preliminary data from all the manufacturers, and they've concluded this is like a strain change that we have every year with seasonal flu. And the vaccine is produced in manners that's no different than the seasonal vaccine, which we've been using by millions of doses for the last 50 years, I guess. So we have no concern about anything being special about this vaccine. But from all the data that we've seen, we agree that we can treat this like a seasonal flu vaccine. There's a change, but it's manufactured in the same way as the seasonal vaccine.
What do you say to people who are afraid of getting any vaccination of either of the flu vaccines?
Well, I think they better look at the statistics on the number of people who have been ill and the number of people that have died with this new H1N1 virus, and then they have to weigh the risk and the benefit. And if they think that the risk of the vaccine is greater than the risk for infection with the virus, then they can make their choice. But personally, I think that they are much better off if they take the vaccine and get protected against infection with this new virus. Since August 30th, they would attribute over 10,000 hospitalizations to the new H1N1 virus and almost 1,000 deaths. That's only since September. Each week since September 1st, the numbers have doubled, and we've seen a skyrocketing change in the number of people presenting with influenza-like illness to clinics and emergency rooms. So I think we can expect those numbers to increase, and it does not appear that we've reached the peak of activity for this wave yet. We're still going to see a lot of illness before this fall is out.
You've probably seen it on the internet yourself. All of these warnings, don't get the H1N1 vaccine because it has mercury in it. There's just all kinds of warnings. Could you talk about this H1N1 vaccine?
Well, the vaccine, as I said, is produced the same way as the seasonal flu vaccine. The vaccine that will be given to young children and to pregnant women will have no mercury in it. And the vaccine in multi-dose vials for older people will have the usual amount of thimerosal in it. Now, I want to say that there's no evidence that thimerosal has any toxicity, and the studies have shown that it's rapidly metabolized and excreted in the bile and does not accumulate and produce toxic effects. It's an ethyl mercury, which is very different than the mercury that causes poisoning, which is methyl mercury, and is not metabolized rapidly and tends to accumulate and produce toxicity. So I don't think anybody has to worry about the thimerosal that's in influenza vaccine and the dose that's given. It's not going to cause any harm.
Who, at what ages, will be able to get the H1N1 novel vaccine?
The goal is to immunize everybody in the country, but obviously, if it's the younger people who are having all the infections and are dying of it, it would be best if it's targeted toward younger population now and pregnant women, because pregnant women have an excess mortality with this H1N1. So it's important that we get an activated vaccine for pregnant women and the live or an activated vaccine for school kids particularly, because if we can get the school kids immunized rapidly, we'll slow down the spread of the virus, and we will be able to immunize the rest of the population, hopefully before they've all been infected.
Why are pregnant women so vulnerable to the new virus?
They're susceptible to it. That's one thing. And pregnant women are vulnerable not because they have any problem with their immunity. They respond to the vaccine very well. But as the pregnancy progresses, the diaphragm is pushed up so that their pulmonary reserve is compromised, and also they don't have the cardiopulmonary reserve that women in their age who are not pregnant have, and therefore they're more vulnerable to, if they get pneumonia with influenza, then they're more likely to die. And the other thing to remember is that if a pregnant woman takes the vaccine, she makes antibodies, which are also passed to her new baby. It's no use to vaccinate babies before 6 months of age, so the only protection they can get against infection is the antibodies they get from the mother. So if the mother is vaccinated during pregnancy, she will not only protect herself, but she will provide protection for her baby that should last, hopefully, for the first 6 months, or at least for the first 4 or 5 months after birth. And that's a very vulnerable period for the baby, too.
What has happened here in the last 4 or 5 months politically in which H1N1 and developing vaccines has been turned into a political football?
The anti-vaccine groups that seem to be intent on doing this, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's flu vaccine or some other vaccine, and they try to attack it. And I think that's unfortunate because all the studies show that vaccines are very safe, and the amount of disease they prevent is amazing. And in this era of high cost of medical care, we should be doing everything we can to prevent illness and reduce cost of health care, because otherwise we're going to be drowned in the cost of health care. So to go against agents that are as effective as vaccines is certainly against the national interest in our economy.
And that the H1N1 novel virus could just sort of keep perking along until what?
Well, I think it'll produce a pretty sharp outbreak this fall, and then it may die out a little bit, and then it may either recur in the winter or it will come back next year.
In the fall of 2010.
Right.
And the question would be, will it have changed the agglutinate again so that it's more virulent or less?
It usually mutates in response to immunity, the population, and partially it'll depend on how rapidly we distribute vaccine against the current virus, and then we may see a change. But whether or not it will change the virulence, that's really speculation.
By the middle of next year, what might be the projected deaths from the combination of these two viruses this year? What is normal and what might happen now?
Normal seasonal flu is 50,000 excess deaths, and that's the average. And the direct medical cost plus indirect cost due to disruption of social factors is $87 billion a year just for seasonal flu. So the cost is very high for flu every year.
And how many more than 50,000 would you expect in deaths?
Well, I would expect the total to be, say, 80,000 excess deaths.
Not quite doubling, but getting up there.
Yeah, getting up there. But the age-specific mortality will be different because there'll be much higher mortality in younger people than we usually see.
Another aspect of this novel H1N1 are the differences in symptoms from patient to patient. Recent child deaths in Indiana and New Mexico shocked the parents because each healthy girl had few symptoms other than a sore throat and nausea, until each child suddenly declined rapidly, went to emergency rooms, and died without any evidence of other medical complications other than lab-confirmed H1N1 virus. The more typical symptoms summarized in this recent CDC research include 39% of patients had diarrhea or vomiting compared to only 5% with normal seasonal flu. About 40% of H1N1 patients ended up with pneumonia because the virus attacks especially the lung tissue. All had been put on breathing machines, but 7% still died. Weigh that higher mortality rate against the fact that about 75% of all these patients in the CDC study had been given antiviral medicines such as Tamiflu. This means even with the antivirals, mortality was higher than normal. As Dr. Gleason pointed out, with the virulent strain of H3N2 now making its way north on top of the current H1N1, deaths from influenza in the United States by February 2010 could nearly double. That's why it is important for older people to get the seasonal flu vaccine as soon as possible, and why those on the list to receive the H1N1 vaccine now being distributed should get that vaccine as soon as possible. And Whitley, I wonder myself, as the numbers are doubling and we are seeing headlines on the front page every day in the Albuquerque Journal about this widespread impact on infants, school children, and pregnant women here, that this is the signal, this is coming of what we still have to unfold between now and February.
Well, I think it may be, Linda. H1N1 has come very close in my family because my brother had it. His symptoms were not respiratory, but blinding headaches in the back of his head, and he's tested positive for the disease. He's recovering from it fine. He's in the age group that is least affected by it. But nevertheless, our doctor has advised myself and my wife to take pneumonia vaccinations as well as H1N1 vaccinations when they come out, and of course the regular flu vaccinations. We swear by flu vaccinations now, and we are absolutely not afraid of them. I think there's just not sufficient evidence that vaccines are dangerous. I think they do a lot more good than damage.
I could not agree with you more. I have gotten a flu shot every year in the fall to help protect myself, and it seems to me that I have had less flu in my life than a lot of other people who have not had flu vaccines, and it has troubled me that something as important as a new vaccine against a new novel virus, H1N1, would have been turned into a political football in this country and in other parts of the world, but especially the United States, when getting this vaccine to the young and to the pregnant could save lives. And now with H3N2 about to drop into our country, and that would affect older people, everyone needs to get the seasonal flu vaccine. I couldn't stress that more.
Absolutely, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of emails saying, oh, it's terribly, terribly dangerous. Think twice about it, folks. What's out there might be a lot more dangerous than the cure in this particular case. Linda Moulton Howe, thank you for being so terrific at what you do. Well, Linda, thank you so much for being with us. It is awfully good to have you back again. And, folks, we will be having Linda as often as we can afford her. Make that every week. It's very simple. Simply go to unknowncountry.com and start a subscription. And for you subscribers, as you've heard earlier in the program, do not miss Jaime Maussan and the latest findings about that bizarre creature that was discovered in Mexico in 2007. This is the very latest information, so do not miss it.
This has been Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. We'll be back next week with another journey to the extreme edge. Don't miss a single week, and tell your friends about our unique program. Our Dreamland crew is Evan Ross on sound, Dana Augustine on program art, Daniel Stegall, webmaster, and I'm your Dreamland announcer, Brian Arnold. Thank you very much for listening.